Last March, I was lying in a hospital bed in Seattle after a car accident when my father walked in, looked at the heart monitor beside me, and said if I couldn't pay rent in 3 days, I should get out of his house. When I told him I had just survived a crash, he slapped me so hard the nurse ran into the room. I thought that moment was the worst betrayal of my life. I was wrong. My name is Lena Caraway, and within 4 months, I would discover my father had secretly taken a $1.2 million insurance payout my mother left for me, opened $38,000 of credit cards under my social security number, and sent the money to a woman in Florida he had been hiding for years. The morning federal agents knocked on his door was the moment he finally realized the quiet daughter he thought he could control had been building a case against him the entire time. Chapter 1. The night my father slapped me in a hospital bed. The first thing I remember was the sound, a steady electronic rhythm somewhere to my left, a soft mechanical pulse that seemed louder every time I tried to breathe. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was too white and too bright, and for a moment I could not tell if it was morning or night. Then the pain in my ribs reminded me where I was. I was lying in a hospital bed in Seattle, inside University Medical Center, and every breath felt like someone pressing something heavy against my chest. A nurse noticed my eyes open and stepped closer. "You are awake. That is good. Try not to move too much." My voice came out rough. "What happened?" "You were in a car accident on Rainier Avenue this afternoon. Someone ran a red light and hit the passenger side of your car." The memory came back slowly. The flash of headlights, the violent jolt, the sound of metal crushing. "You are lucky," she continued. 2 fractured ribs and a mild concussion. No internal bleeding. Lucky did not feel like the right word when breathing hurt that much. Not long after, a tall man with tired eyes walked into the room. His name badge read Nathan Cole. "I am Dr. Cole," he said. "I was the physician on duty when you arrived." He explained the injuries again, the broken ribs, the bruising, the observation period. If everything stayed stable, I could probably go home in a few days. I nodded while he spoke, but my mind kept drifting. The medication made everything feel slightly distant. When he left the room, it became quiet again. Machines hummed softly beside the bed. Footsteps moved past the hallway outside. At some point later that evening, the door opened again. My father stepped inside. Gerald Caraway was 59 and looked older every year. Decades of running a small HVAC repair business had worn his shoulders down and deep lines had settled around his mouth. Behind him stood Melissa, my stepmother, and behind her, leaning near the doorframe, was my younger brother Travis. For a brief moment, I felt relief. "Hey, Dad," I said. He looked around the room first, taking in the machines and the IV line in my arm. "You look fine," he said. It was not exactly what I expected to hear. "The doctor says I got lucky," I answered quietly. "Good." He pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down. Melissa stayed near the wall with her arms folded. Travis hovered near the door like he didn't want to be there. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then my father leaned forward. "We need to talk about something." I assumed he meant the accident. "About the crash," I said quietly. "The police said the other driver ran the light." "Not that." He rubbed his forehead. "It is about the house." "The house?" "Yeah." His voice tightened slightly. "You are 32 years old, Lena. You have a good job at that company of yours. It's time you started paying rent if you're going to keep living there." For a moment, I thought he was joking. "Dad," I said slowly, "I'm in a hospital bed right now." "That's not the point. You work for Northbridge Commerce. Those people make good money." The conversation felt surreal. "You're bringing this up now?" "Yes, because I need the money now." Melissa finally spoke. "Gerald, maybe this can wait," but her tone suggested she didn't actually care if it waited or not. My father ignored her. "The bank sent another notice yesterday," he said. "We are behind on the mortgage again." My stomach tightened. "If I don't make a payment soon, they can start the foreclosure process." The word hung in the air. Foreclosure. I tried to shift in the bed, but the pain in my ribs stopped me. I didn't know things were that bad. "They are." He leaned closer. "So you're going to start paying rent." I stared at him. "How much?" $2,000 a month. The number hit harder than I expected. $2,000? "You make more than that in a week," he snapped. I felt anger rise through the fog of medication. This conversation can wait until I'm out of the hospital. It cannot. His jaw tightened. "The bank gave me a deadline. I need money soon or the house is in real trouble." "So your solution is to demand rent from your daughter while she's recovering from a car accident?" "You have 3 days." 3 days? I shook my head. "No." The word came out quietly but firmly. His hand moved before I could react. The sound of the slap cracked through the room. My head turned sideways and pain shot across my cheek. The movement pulled at the IV line, and the heart monitor began beeping loudly. A nurse rushed inside. "What is going on in here?" My father stood up quickly. "She's fine. She's just confused from the medication." The nurse looked at me, then at my face. "Ma'am, do you need security?" My head felt heavy and my ribs throbbed with every breath. "I'm okay," I muttered. She adjusted the IV line and checked the monitor. "I'm making a note in your chart. If you want to file a report, we can call hospital security." My father said nothing. A few minutes later, Dr. Cole stepped back into the room. "Everything all right?" His eyes moved from my father to the side of my face. "Miss Carraway, if something happened, we can document it." I closed my eyes for a moment. Everything hurt and I was exhausted. "I just want to rest," I said. Dr. Cole studied me for another second before nodding. "If you change your mind, let the nurses know." He left again. My father headed toward the door. 3 days, he repeated. "If you can't pay rent, you can find somewhere else to live." Melissa followed him out without looking at me. Travis lingered for half a second. Our eyes met briefly before he turned away and stepped into the hallway. The door closed. The room fell silent except for the soft rhythm of the machines beside my bed. My cheek still burned. For a long time, I stared at the ceiling. Eventually, my thoughts drifted backward, back to 2014, the year my mother died. After that, everything in our house slowly changed. My father took over every financial decision. Bills, insurance, bank accounts. I never questioned it. I was in my early 20s and still figuring out my own life. Whenever he said the family needed help, I sent money. Sometimes a few $100s, sometimes more. He always said it was temporary, just until things got better. Lying there in the hospital bed, replaying the conversation again and again, something about it felt different now. The urgency in his voice, the way Melissa watched quietly, the way Travis avoided looking at me. For the first time, a small, uncomfortable thought pushed into my mind. Maybe the problem in my family had never been bad luck. Maybe there was something else happening with money all those years, something I had never really stopped to question. I stared at the ceiling while the lights outside the window dimmed as the night passed. By the time sleep finally pulled me under, one thing had shifted inside me. What happened in that hospital room was not just a fight. It was the first moment I started wondering what my father had really been doing with money for all those years. Chapter 2. The house I grew up in felt different. I was buying time. That was the only way to describe the 3 days after I left the hospital. I answered emails, I kept my head down, I pretended the world had not tilted sideways the moment my father slapped me in a hospital bed and demanded rent like I was a stranger under his roof. But the truth was that something had already shifted inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Gerald's voice again. 3 days. And underneath that voice, there was something else that bothered me more than the slap. Foreclosure. When I was discharged from University Medical Center, the air outside felt colder than it should have. Seattle skies were low and gray, and the streets were still damp from a light rain. The ride back to the house felt longer than usual. I watched familiar neighborhoods pass by through the car window and wondered how the same city could suddenly feel so different. When the driver dropped me off, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the house. It looked exactly the same. Same faded paint on the siding, same cracked concrete path leading to the porch, same old mailbox leaning slightly to one side, but it did not feel like home anymore. Melissa opened the door before I reached the porch. "You are back," she said. Her tone was flat, like I had returned from a short grocery run instead of a hospital stay. I stepped inside slowly, careful not to move my ribs too quickly. "Where's Dad?" "In the back," she said. Travis was stretched across the couch in the living room with his phone inches from his face. He glanced up briefly. "Hey." That was the entire greeting. I shifted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "I need to lie down." Melissa looked down the hallway for a second before answering. "Your room is not available right now?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We are reorganizing some things," she said. "You can use the sofa for now." I looked past her. The hallway was quiet. The door to my bedroom was closed, and something about it looked wrong. Then I realized what it was. There was a lock on the doorknob. My stomach tightened. There had never been a lock there before. "Where is my key?" I asked. "You do not need one," Melissa replied calmly. "It is temporary." Temporary. The word hung in the air. Part of me wanted to walk straight down the hallway and try the door, but my ribs throbbed with every breath, and the truth was I did not have the strength for an argument. Not yet. So I carried my bag into the living room and sat down on the couch. The cushions dipped under my weight. Travis did not look up again. "You okay?" he asked without taking his eyes off the screen. "I'm fine." The rest of the afternoon dragged slowly. I opened my laptop and logged into my work account at Northbridge Commerce. My job involved analyzing marketing data and tracking campaign performance, things that normally required focus, but it was impossible to concentrate with the tension filling the house. Melissa moved around the kitchen with sharp movements. Cabinets closed harder than necessary. Travis came and went several times. Gerald passed through the room once and didn't even look at me. Later that evening, he finally stopped near the doorway. 3 days, he said. I looked up from my laptop. "I heard you." "Good." Then he walked away. That night, the couch felt smaller than it had ever felt before. Every time I shifted, my ribs reminded me exactly how fragile I still was. The next morning, I logged into work early. Kara Jensen from HR sent a message asking how I was recovering and whether I needed more time. I told her I was fine. It was easier than explaining everything. The second day passed in the same strange silence. By the third afternoon, I needed air. I forced myself to walk out to the mailbox even though every step made my ribs ache. Inside the mailbox were 3 envelopes with my name printed on them. I carried them inside and sat at the dining table. Melissa wiped the kitchen counter nearby. "Mail came," she said, without looking up. I opened the first envelope, a credit card statement. My name sat at the top of the page. Underneath was the house address. The balance listed was more than I expected. I frowned and flipped through the page. Several purchases were listed. None of them were mine. I opened the second envelope. Another credit card statement. Different bank, another balance. Then the third envelope. Another card. My chest tightened. I looked up at Melissa. "Do you know what this is?" She barely glanced over. "Probably junk mail." But this was not junk mail. That night, the house fell quieter earlier than usual. Travis disappeared into his room, and Melissa turned off the kitchen lights. I sat alone in the living room and opened my credit report on my phone. The page took a moment to load. When it appeared, my stomach dropped. Accounts filled the screen. Credit cards I had never seen before. Some opened years ago, some opened recently. Balances stacked on top of each other. $38,000. I stared at the number. I clicked into one account. The address listed on the application was the house I was sitting in. Another account showed the same address, and another. My hands started shaking. I called the customer service number on one of the statements. After several minutes on hold, someone finally answered. I verified my identity, then I asked about the account. The representative confirmed that the card had been opened using my social security number and the address connected to my file. I didn't open that account, I said. If you believe the account was opened fraudulently, you will need to file a fraud claim, she said carefully. Fraud. The word felt heavy. She explained the process step by step. I needed to place a fraud alert and freeze my credit with the reporting agencies. When the call ended, I sat still for a moment. Then I opened the websites and began the process. First, I placed a fraud alert. Then I froze my credit. One bureau, then the second, then the third. Each confirmation message felt like locking a door someone else had been walking through. When I finished, the house was silent. I stood slowly and stretched my back. That's when I heard Gerald's voice, low, frustrated. His office door was partially open down the hallway and light spilled across the floor. I moved closer quietly. I only caught pieces of the conversation. I sent it, Marina. I told you I would send it this month. There was a pause. No, stop asking questions. I said I'm handling it. My heart started beating faster. Marina. I stepped away from the hallway before he could see me and sat back down on the couch. The next morning, I searched the name on my phone, Marina Holt. A profile appeared online, location listed as Tampa, Florida. The photos showed bright sunlight and palm trees, a completely different world from gray Seattle. I stared at the screen for a long time. My father was sending money to a woman in Florida. My credit report showed tens of thousands of dollars in debt under my name. My bedroom door was locked, and Gerald had slapped me in a hospital bed because he wanted money. I did not know the entire story yet, but for the first time, the pieces were starting to form a shape. Something had been happening inside that house for years, something connected to my name, and the more I thought about it, the clearer one terrible possibility became. The identity I believed was mine might have been used by someone else the entire time.
Chapter 3. The document my mother left behind. I did not sleep much that night. The thoughts stayed in my head long after the house went quiet. If my identity had been used to open credit cards, then something bigger had been happening for years, and I had simply never looked closely enough to see it. Saturday morning arrived gray and silent. Gerald had already left the house early. Travis was still asleep upstairs. Melissa moved somewhere in the kitchen, her footsteps light but restless. I waited until the shower started running upstairs before I stood up from the couch. My mother's things were stored in the basement. Gerald had moved everything down there after she died in 2014, stacking boxes against the concrete wall as if he were sealing away a chapter of life he no longer wanted to deal with. I had avoided that space for years, but now it felt like the only place left where the truth might still exist. The basement smelled like dust and cardboard. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a dull yellow light over the stacks of labeled boxes. One of them read, "Mom Stuff." I knelt slowly and lifted the lid. Inside were photo albums, folded clothes, and a plastic folder filled with documents. My chest tightened. I could almost hear my mother's voice reminding me that important paperwork should always be kept together. I opened the folder carefully. The first pages were old bills and receipts. Then I saw a document with a formal company header, life insurance policy. My hands froze. I scanned the page and found the benefit amount printed clearly. $1.2 million. For a moment, I simply stared at it. My mother had always been practical and careful with money, but I never imagined she had arranged something like this. I flipped through the document until I found the beneficiary section. Lena Caraway. My name. My breathing slowed as the realization sank in. My mother had planned this. She had intended to leave something behind for me. And yet, after she died, I had never received anything. I remembered the weeks after the funeral. Gerald handled every conversation about paperwork and finances. He told me there were expenses, complicated claims, things that would take time. I believed him. Now, the question felt unavoidable. Where had that money gone? I carried the folder upstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. The house was quiet again. Melissa had disappeared into another room. I opened my laptop and searched for someone who might help me understand what I was looking at. One name came back to me almost immediately. Riley Morgan. My mother used to mention her occasionally, a financial attorney she trusted. I remembered meeting Riley once when I was younger. She had been confident, professional, the kind of person who listened carefully before speaking. I found her law office online and called. The receptionist transferred the call after I asked for Riley. A familiar voice answered. Lena. Hearing my name spoken like that nearly caught me off guard. Hi, I said quietly. It has been a while. It has. Are you all right? I hesitated. I found something that belonged to my mom. I think I need help understanding it. There was a brief pause. Come to my office Monday morning, Riley said. Bring whatever you found. I agreed and ended the call. The rest of the weekend passed slowly. Gerald continued acting as if nothing unusual had happened at the hospital. He reminded me about rent twice, once while grabbing something from the fridge, and once while passing through the living room. Melissa said little, but watched me closely. I kept the insurance documents hidden in my bag. Monday morning, I told them I had a work meeting downtown. That was close enough to the truth. Riley's office was located in a modern building in central Seattle. When I arrived, she greeted me personally at the door. She looked about 35, composed and direct, with the calm confidence of someone used to dealing with serious problems. You look tired, she said gently. I have been dealing with a lot. I handed her the folder. She opened it and studied the policy carefully. When she reached the benefit amount, her expression changed slightly. $1.2 million. I nodded. I never received any of it. Riley looked up. Did your father handle the claim after your mother died? Yes, he said there was paperwork and expenses, and I trusted him. Riley closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. All right, the first step is simple. We need the claim file from the insurance company. That will show who submitted the claim, the signature used, and where the payout was sent. How long does that take? Usually a couple of weeks. Before leaving, I told Riley everything else. The credit cards under my name, the $38,000 of debt, the call I overheard mentioning someone named Marina in Florida. Riley listened quietly. Identity theft within families happens more often than people think, but we need documents before making conclusions. I signed the authorization forms and left the office feeling both anxious and strangely hopeful. For the next 3 weeks, I lived between two worlds. During the day, I continued working remotely for Northbridge Commerce, attending meetings and completing reports as if nothing had changed. At night, I returned to the couch in my father's living room and listened to the house settle around me. Gerald became increasingly tense. He talked more about money and the mortgage. He left notes on the kitchen counter with numbers written on them. Melissa said little, but watched me closely. I kept the insurance documents hidden in my bag. Monday morning, I told my manager I had a medical appointment downtown. That was close enough to the truth. Riley's office was located in a modern building in central Seattle. When I arrived, she greeted me personally at the door. She looked about 35, composed and direct, with the calm confidence of someone used to dealing with serious problems. You look tired, she said gently. I have been dealing with a lot. I handed her the folder. She opened it and studied the policy carefully. When she reached the benefit amount, her expression changed slightly. $1.2 million. I nodded. I never received any of it. Riley looked up. Did your father handle the claim after your mother died? Yes, he said there was paperwork and expenses, and I trusted him. Riley closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. All right, the first step is simple. We need the claim file from the insurance company. That will show who submitted the claim, the signature used, and where the payout was sent. How long does that take? Usually a couple of weeks. Before leaving, I told Riley everything else. The credit cards under my name, the $38,000 of debt, the call I overheard mentioning someone named Marina in Florida. Riley listened quietly. Identity theft within families happens more often than people think, but we need documents before making conclusions. I signed the authorization forms and left the office feeling both anxious and strangely hopeful. For the next 3 weeks, I lived between two worlds. During the day, I continued working remotely for Northbridge Commerce, attending meetings and completing reports as if nothing had changed. At night, I returned to the couch in my father's living room and listened to the house settle around me. Gerald became increasingly tense. He talked more about money and the mortgage. He left notes on the kitchen counter with numbers written on them. Melissa said little, but watched me closely. I kept the insurance documents hidden in my bag. Monday morning, I told my manager I had a medical appointment downtown. That was close enough to the truth.
Then you were not even in Seattle when this was signed. She flipped to the next document. Here is the payout record. The insurance company transferred the full benefit to an account connected to a business under your father's name. My chest tightened. Then she showed me another sheet. Subsequent transfers from that account. Some remained in Washington, but some went out of state. Her finger rested on a line near the bottom of the page. Florida. Recipient name listed beside the transfer, Marina Holt. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Riley leaned forward slightly. Lena, if that signature was forged, then this situation is not simply a family disagreement. It is insurance fraud. I swallowed hard. And the credit cards? Those could be identity theft. The words settled in the room like heavy stones. I stared down at the papers. Every line seemed to redraw the story I had believed about my family. My mother had tried to protect me. My father had taken the money instead. What happens now? I asked quietly. Riley's voice remained steady. Now we document everything. We build a clear timeline and decide which legal steps to take. I nodded slowly. When I left Riley's office later that evening, the rain had softened to a mist. Seattle's lights reflected across the wet streets. For the first time since the hospital, something inside me felt steady. I still did not know how this would end, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer going to ignore the truth hiding inside my own family. Chapter 4. I let them think I didn't know. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. When I walked back into the house that evening, Gerald was sitting at the kitchen table staring at his phone while Melissa washed dishes. Travis was in the living room watching television with the volume low. Everything looked ordinary, and yet I knew things about them now that could never be unknown again. I had copies of documents in my bag showing that my father had taken the insurance money my mother meant for me. I had proof that my identity had been used to open credit cards. I had records connecting Gerald to transfers of money to a woman in Florida named Marina Holt, but none of them knew that yet. Riley had been very clear about that part. Do not confront them yet, she told me during our last meeting. Why not? I asked. Because once they know you are aware, they will start protecting themselves. Documents disappear, stories change, people panic. So you act normal. Normal felt like the most unnatural thing in the world. I set my bag down near the couch and moved slowly through the kitchen. Melissa glanced at me briefly. You are late? Work meeting ran long, I said. Gerald did not look up. You find a place to get that money yet? I kept my voice calm. I'm working on it. He snorted. Working on it does not stop the bank. I nodded like a tired daughter who had no answers. Inside my mind, I was already building a timeline. That night, I emailed Riley the credit card statements I had received and filed a formal identity theft report online. The process took longer than I expected. Every account had to be listed, every suspicious charge documented. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. The next morning, Riley called. "Good news," she said. "Once the fraud report is filed, the credit bureaus are required to keep those accounts frozen during the investigation. So they cannot keep opening new ones under my name." "Exactly." Her voice shifted slightly. "Also, I want you to start collecting anything you can find related to your father's business or financial history. Even small details can matter." That turned out to be easier than expected. Our next-door neighbor, Dana Whitlock, had lived on the street longer than my family. She was 63 and retired, but before that, she had spent decades working as an accountant. Dana had known my mother well. I ran into her 2 days later while she was watering plants in her front yard. "Lena," she said, her voice warm with concern. "I heard you were in an accident." I nodded. "I'm all right, just a few broken ribs." She studied my face carefully. "You look tired." I hesitated, then decided to trust her. "Dana, can I ask you something about finances?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Of course." We ended up sitting at her kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea. I explained a simplified version of what had been happening: the debts, the credit cards, the tension in the house. Dana listened quietly. "Your father's HVAC business has not been doing well," she said after a moment. I looked up. "You know that?" She nodded. "People talk, and contractors sometimes leave financial footprints. A couple of years ago, I helped a neighbor review a repair invoice, and I noticed your father's company had multiple liens listed in public records." My stomach tightened. "From when?" "Around 2022, Dana said. Late payments on equipment loans, supplier invoices not getting paid on time." She stood up and walked to a small desk near the window. After a moment, she returned with a printed page. "Public record. Mortgage delinquency notice tied to your property address." I stared at the document. The notice was dated months earlier, so the bank had been warning him long before the hospital incident, which means the rent demand was not sudden panic. It was the last step in a long financial collapse. Dana leaned forward slightly. "Lena, I am going to say something blunt." "Please do." If someone is desperate enough financially, they sometimes start using whatever resources they can access. Her eyes met mine, including family. The truth of that statement sat heavily between us. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued pretending everything was normal inside the house. Gerald's mood grew sharper. He complained constantly about bills and customers who refused to pay. Melissa watched me carefully but still avoided direct confrontation. Then, one evening, things escalated. Gerald called me into the kitchen after dinner. "Sit down," he said. Melissa slid a piece of paper across the table. "You need to sign this." I looked down. The document was titled Family Expense Reimbursement Agreement. It was written in vague legal language, but the meaning was clear enough. By signing it, I would accept responsibility for certain household debts and financial obligations, including the credit cards. My chest tightened. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Melissa folded her arms. "It is fair. You have lived here for years." Gerald leaned forward. "You owe your share." I forced myself to stay calm. "I need time to read it carefully." "It is simple," Gerald said. "Just sign." I shook my head slowly. "I do not sign financial agreements without reviewing them first." His jaw tightened. "You think you are smarter than everyone now?" "No," I said quietly. "I just want to understand what I'm agreeing to." Melissa pushed the paper closer. "You are being dramatic." I slid the document back towards them. "I will look at it tomorrow." Then I stood up and walked away before the conversation could turn into a fight. Later that night, I sent a photo of the document to Riley. Her reply came quickly. "Do not sign anything." "I will not." "Good." That paper attempts to shift liability for those debts onto you. It's essentially an admission you are responsible. So they are trying to protect themselves. Exactly. During the following week, Riley continued tracing the insurance payout records. The banking documents showed multiple transfers from the account connected to Gerald's business. Several large payments had been sent to Florida. Each one listed the same recipient, Marina Holt. Riley called me again one afternoon. "We confirmed something else," she said. "What?" "Those transfers were not one-time payments. They happened repeatedly over several years." My stomach sank. "He's been sending her money for that long?" "Yes." I thought about the phone call I overheard in the hallway. "I sent it, Marina. I told you I would send it this month." Suddenly, the words sounded different, less like a casual payment, more like a long-running obligation, a second life. I sat quietly while Riley continued speaking. "At this point, we have enough documentation to move forward legally. Identity theft evidence, forged insurance claim signature, financial transfers connected to the insurance payout. What happens next? We prepare a formal complaint and submit the evidence to the appropriate financial investigation authorities." I leaned back in my chair. The room around me felt strangely quiet. Everything that had been hidden for years was finally starting to surface. When I hung up the phone that evening, Gerald was sitting in the living room watching television. He glanced at me briefly. "You figure out the rent yet?" I looked at him calmly. "I'm working on it." He nodded and returned his attention to the screen. For the first time since this started, I realized something important. He believed I was still confused, still weak, still the same daughter who trusted him without question. And for now, I was willing to let him keep believing that. Chapter 5. The day everything finally came out. 4 months passed slowly after the investigation began. From the outside, my life looked unchanged. I still slept on the couch in the same living room. Gerald still complained about money. Melissa still watched me carefully, and Travis still tried to stay invisible whenever tension filled the house. But beneath that quiet routine, everything was moving. Riley and I kept building the case piece by piece. She organized every document into a clear timeline. My identity theft report, the credit card statements opened under my name, the insurance claim packet with the forged signature, bank records that showed the insurance payout landing in an account connected to Gerald's business and then moving in transfers out of Washington. Dana Whitlock helped as well. She continued checking public financial records and found more proof of Gerald's growing financial trouble. Equipment loans for the HVAC business had gone delinquent in 2022. Mortgage warnings had been issued months before he demanded rent from me. It was not a sudden crisis. It was a slow collapse that had been hidden for years. One afternoon, Riley called with an update. "The case has been assigned to a federal financial crimes investigator," she said. "His name is Elliot Rhodes." I sat quietly for a moment. "So what happens now?" "They review the file and decide how to proceed. They may ask you questions, but most of the work will focus on the documents." That evening, Gerald asked about rent again. "You planning to pay anything or just sit there waiting for someone to rescue you?" I kept my expression calm. "I'm handling it." He shook his head and walked away. 2 weeks later, Riley sent a message that made my stomach tighten. "They are ready to execute a search warrant." I read the sentence 3 times. Part of me had been waiting for that moment. Another part felt like a storm was about to crash into the house where I had grown up. I told no one. The morning it happened began like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open when Gerald came downstairs. Melissa followed a few minutes later. Travis appeared last, half awake and looking for breakfast. Then someone knocked on the front door. Not lightly, firm and official. Gerald frowned and walked toward it. When he opened the door, several people stood on the porch, 2 federal agents and 2 uniformed officers. The man in front spoke calmly. "Mr. Gerald Caraway?" "Yeah." The agent held up paperwork. "We have a search warrant for this residence related to an investigation involving identity theft and insurance fraud." For a moment, nobody moved. Melissa stepped forward. "There must be some mistake." The agent shook his head. "Ma'am, please step aside." They entered the house quickly but without aggression. One agent asked Gerald to sit at the kitchen table. Another moved directly toward his office. A third officer began documenting items around the living room. Travis stood frozen near the stairs. I remained quiet near the hallway. A female agent approached me. "Are you Lena Caraway?" "Yes." "We may need a brief statement from you later today." I nodded. Gerald looked at me with disbelief. "What did you do?" I met his eyes. "I protected myself." Melissa's voice cracked. "Gerald, tell them this is wrong." But her hands were shaking. The agents began collecting evidence. A laptop from Gerald's office, several folders of financial records, a flash drive attached to his keys, stacks of bank statements and mail. One agent opened a drawer and pulled out a file with my name on it. Gerald's face lost its color. Travis finally spoke. "I didn't do anything. I swear I didn't know." Melissa turned sharply. "Be quiet." Gerald stood suddenly. "This is harassment. You cannot just come in here and take my property." One of the officers spoke calmly. "Sir, please sit down." Gerald glanced at the search warrant on the table. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something colder. Fear. The agents worked for nearly an hour. When they finished, one of them handed Gerald a business card. "You will be contacted regarding the investigation. Do not destroy or remove any financial documents." After they left the house felt empty. Gerald turned toward me immediately. "You set this up." I kept my voice steady. "I forged your signature on my mother's insurance claim. You opened credit cards using my social security number. You transferred the money to Florida." Melissa began crying. "We were drowning financially," she said. Gerald snapped at her. "Stop talking." Travis stared at the floor. I felt something inside me loosen. Not satisfaction exactly, more like relief after carrying a heavy weight for too long. Later that day, Riley met Rhodes at her office, where Elliot joined us for a brief interview. He asked simple questions about where I lived when the insurance claim was signed, and when I first noticed the fraudulent credit accounts. I answered each one clearly. The investigation moved slowly after that. Subpoenas were issued, bank records were reviewed, the insurance company cooperated with the authorities. Several accounts connected to the insurance payout were frozen during the process. Gerald attempted to speak with me twice in the following weeks, but I refused. Melissa left a note asking if we could resolve things as a family. I threw it away. Travis approached me one evening. "I didn't know it was that serious," he said quietly. "You saw the bills. You heard the phone calls." He looked down. "I just didn't want to believe it." Neither did I. After that conversation, we stopped talking. Eventually, Riley confirmed that formal legal proceedings were moving forward. Assets connected to the fraudulent insurance payout were under investigation, and several financial accounts were frozen. For me, the most important change was simpler. I moved out. The day I packed my belongings, the sky over Seattle was clear for once. I carried 2 boxes and a suitcase out to a friend's car. Gerald stayed inside his office. Melissa watched from the living room window. Travis did not come downstairs. I rented a small apartment near downtown Seattle. It was not large, but it was quiet and entirely mine. The first night there, I slept in a real bed and woke up feeling something I had not felt in a long time: peace. I returned to working full-time at Northbridge Commerce. Kara noticed the difference in my mood during a meeting one afternoon. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled slightly. "I am." sometimes I still think about my mother and the decision she made years ago to protect me. Her plan was simple. She wanted to make sure I would have stability if something ever happened to her. For a long time, that plan was hidden, but eventually the truth surfaced. The night my father slapped me in the hospital, he thought he was showing me who had power in the family. What he really did was give me the reason to stop ignoring what had been happening all along. If you have ever experienced financial control or betrayal inside your own family, share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this remind us that silence protects the wrong people. And if you want to hear more real revenge stories about truth, accountability, and reclaiming your life, make sure to subscribe and stay with the channel for the next story.